sweet treat. We got a sweet treat going on here.
Um, what?
We got a sweet treat going on here.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
I'm so high.
I can tell.
Can you tell?
You're so fucking stupid. I can tell. Leans in with your eyes half closed. Can you tell? All right, I'm pulling my shit out. I'm pulling my dick out. Kindle.
Um, hold on.
It's also hitting me, just so you know.
I'll hit you harder.
What are we on? We're on 3. Yes. Do you remember what happened?
What?
Do you remember what happened? Lock in, little boy.
No. No, remind me.
Remember he amputated that guy?
Mhm. Yeah.
And there was the quarantine camp in Buyu Forest. And, he got so angry that, he ran out of town and found the white clothed guy. And then he took the mask off the guy's face, and it was his own face.
Yes, 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 yes.
Yes. All right. I'm.
Wait.
Oh my god. I gotta. I gotta find my reading voice again. It's been so long. Are you ready?
Yeah, go ahead.
Don't get so excited.
I'm trying to figure out what's wrong with my fucking app.
What app?
My EA app.
You fucking freak. Figure it out first. So you're gonna be trying to read fucking how to fix it.
Yeah. I'm gonna just restart my computer. I'll be
Okay,
right back.
have fun. Hello?
Hello. Let me try one more.
Oh, we gotta turn on our Chinese music, don't we?
Yes. All right, I'm all good.
Hold on, I'm trying to get into fucking Spotify. Oh, it's because I have you opened on my whole screen and you're pinned. Um, Ancient Chinese music.
Hmm.
The Butterfly Lovers Violin Concerto. Okay.
All right.
I don't hear anything. Oh, there it is. Okay.
Waiting for it to start my end.
Do you hear it? What the freak? What the freak?
What the freak?
What about now?
Let me see. Oh wait, hold on. No.
Oh my god, you start it. I'll link with you.
Okay.
Bitch. Bitch, boy.
It's just traditional.
I just searched traditional Chinese music. God, it's hitting, bro. Hurry.
All right, I started it.
Where the fuck are you?
You hear it?
Yes, I do. Wuhan Erhu, thanks.
Yeah.
Bro, we're gonna Gilgamesh again soon.
Oh yes, we have
I
to.
miss a good Gilgamesh sesh.
I love a good.
Alright, fix your shit.
I love a good mesh.
A good
Huh?
mesh sesh. Fix your shit, fix your EA app. Is your EA app working?
Yeah.
You look mentally... I'm not... You're so fucked. You're you're literally not here with me. Stay with me. Come here. Come here. Come to me. Alright, we ready?
Locked in.
You're
Locked in.
You're locked in.
Locked in.
I had to take one of my headphone ears off so I can hear my volume. Oh god, I need to unpin you. Alright. Chapter 39. Gilded Figure Exertion to Block Celestial Ruin is the title. Shilian was beyond outraged. He yanked the sword out of the creature's chest and was about to thrust again when he realized there wasn't a trace of blood on the blade. Instantly, he understood and changed course, slashing off the white-clothed creature's head. The decapitation was swift, and when the head and its body were separated, both shriveled up into a heap of skin bags. That body was an empty shell. Twice he had met this creature, and twice he had used a faked body. Not once had he shown himself in his true form. Although unsurprised, Shilian was still filled with furious resentment. His sword vented his anger on that soft, limped body, the sharp aura of the blade slashing the skin bag to shreds. But still, he wasn't relieved. Feng Xin couldn't watch anymore and tried to stop him. "Your Highness, it's only a shell." But that shell was the exact image of Shilian's younger self, so it looked like Shilian was cruelly mutilating himself. It painted an uncomfortable picture. Shilian heaved a few more deep breaths, then threw the sword to the side and sat on the ground. "I know, but I can't believe he dared to use my face." He was so very angry, and the other two crouched in front of him. They waited in silence for a moment before Feng Xin spoke up. "Your Highness, do you feel better? Don't take his bullshit to heart. He's just playing with you." But Shilian replied, "No, some of the things he said to me weren't a joke. It's just..." Feng Xin was shocked. "He actually told you how to lift the curse?" Shilian's right hand grabbed at his own hair. He didn't tell me how to cure human face disease. What he told me was how to inflict human face disease. The other two were aghast. Inflict? Julian nodded, then looked around. He felt it was best not to stick around by the hill, and that they should leave before talking. He didn't want to see the soldiers avert their gazes, nor hear the cries and whines of patients. So he returned to his bedchambers at the palace, which had been left empty for many years. Once the doors were closed, Julien finally managed to calm down somewhat. He sat down and spoke gravely. The faces growing on those people are dead souls from Yang'an. Some are those who died in the battlefield, but the majority are those who died in the drought. Wu Qing wasn't surprised. No wonder no one from Yang'an was infected with human face disease. Of course they wouldn't attack their own people. Feng Xin frowned. Those who died in the drought weren't killed by those in the imperial capital. Even if they hold a grudge, there's no reason to target us. Julien breathed a sigh. Even if that's the case, you both know when a person dies. You both know that when a person dies, there's a period of confusion. When a person passes away, there was a period of time when their soul was like that of a newborn baby, barely conscious, half cognizant, unaware of who they once were, where they were now, or what they were doing. Depending on the soul's affinity, that period could be long or short, and was called the period of confusion. Under those circumstances, the family or lovers of those spirits could guide or influence them, and the funerary custom of calling spirits on the seventh day was based on this, which I guess is a Chinese funeral thing. He told me that the soldiers of Yang'an harbor an intense animosity towards the capital, Julien continued. That their parents, spouses, children, many of them died in the drought. The souls of the dead are unconsciously affected by their family's emotions, so he used the strong will of those soldiers to instill enmity within the souls. He urged them to take on others' living flesh as a host, and to fight for nourishment within that host's body. It worked because those souls, in their period of confusion, were repeatedly indoctrinated by one thought: if not for them, you could have survived. What kind of hellish belief is that, thinking you could judge who deserves to live or die? Feng Xin asked. Julien covered his forehead. Lang Ying unintentionally buried the body of his son here at the capital, and that became a fuse for the creature's curse. I told him to give me a cure, but even with all that talk, all he told me was how to cast the curse. What in the world? A curse couldn't be lifted simply by knowing that it had been cast. Feng Xin cussed. He is playing you. What the hell? What the fuck? Wu Qing, however, piped up. He wasn't playing with you. He did tell you the way. Between Julien and Feng Xin, one looked up and the other turned his head. What way? The way to lift the curse, Wu Qing replied. His eyes were bright, like he'd discovered a secret. Yang'an's curse works because they harbor hatred towards Shenle, but Shenle doesn't harbor any less hatred towards Yang'an. Julien's eyes widened slightly, and his breathing hitched. Since he told you how to cast the curse, then an eye for an eye. You can cast the same curse and inflict human face disease upon those in Yang'an, Wu Qing continued. Just think, the curse only works if there are live people powering it with their emotions. Once they're infected by the disease, they'll be too busy dealing with it, and maybe in the long run there won't be any of them left to power it, and then the curse will break itself. Julien had never thought of it that way. The explanation dumbfounded him for a moment. Then he blurted out, Absolutely not. Why not? Wu Qing pushed. Don't forget, they were the ones who cast the curse first. Julien instantly rose to his feet. No means no. Also, you're wrong. It's likely that the Yang'an soldiers have the same immunity as the soldiers of Shenle. Don't ask me why, Then infecting only civilians is fine too, Wu Qing immediately cut in. They don't have the capital's medical resources and helping hands. The moment human face disease erupts, it'll spread much faster, and they'll have no way to fight back. Threatening the safety of the civilians to stop their curses would be exactly like forcing them to surrender. They can't compete with the capital in a battle of resources. Julien instantly rejected the idea. Absolutely not. Don't forget that we called them when they attacked the innocent civilians of the capital. Despicable. If we do the same thing, won't we become just as despicable? How would we be any different? Wu Qing schooled his excitement. Your Highness, don't forget the type of people who died to lure you into the land of the Tender's snare. That's who you're calling innocent civilians. Once that was said, Shilian fell into hesitation. To be honest, it was impossible for him not to take that incident to heart. Nonetheless, he stood firm. There are certainly those types, but that's because those who charge at the forefront are the most passionate, so they're the ones you see. In reality, most of the civilians know nothing. Go to Baiza Hill and you'll see, Shilian said. Many of them don't even know what they're fighting. They'll go where there's food. They just want to survive. Muqing, what you're advising me to do right now is to save a group of innocent people by killing another group of innocent people. He sighed. Let me try to think of another way. Muqing's tone was growing impertinent and somewhat mocking. Why would I want to go to Baiza Hill to see how enemy civilians get on? Please. Your Highness, you're so considerate of others, but they've never been considerate of you. Doesn't that suck? Shilian was despondent and hung his head. The image of that leg, packed with faces, floated to the top of his mind. The leg that continued to squirm and twitch even after it had been severed. He hesitated for a long while, but in the end, he still shook his head. At the end of the day, this isn't me being considerate. Even if we only consider ourselves, a curse is a double-edged sword by its very nature. It hurts us while it hurts others, Shilian said. In order to curse someone, the living caster must possess a vicious heart, and those who died also cannot rest in peace. They suffered enough while alive, and now in death they must live on as monsters in another's flesh. You saw those things on that man's leg that day, those faces that were desperately trying to live. How is a life like that any better than living as the one infected? Curses will always rebound one day, and no one will come to a good end. Having been spurned repeatedly, Muqing was losing his patience. Before they reach their bad end, we will have already perished. You don't have a third path, and there is no second cup of water. Wake up, Your Highness. You're running out of time. Shilian could feel his head burning, and he closed his eyes. Don't say any more. Let me think about it. At last, Muqing couldn't hold back any longer and started cursing under his breath. You really are. The one suffering from indecision is you. With a cure in hand, the one refusing is also you. You're really, really annoying. Look at the hellish state of you. The mere sight of you is a pain. Your worshippers must have reaped enough bloody misfortune for 8 lifetimes. At first, Feng Xin had listened to their argument glumly, and because he couldn't contribute any better ideas, he just didn't join in. But at that, he suddenly raised his hand and shoved. Are you done? Muqing was shoved back a few steps, and Shilian looked up. Feng Xin? Your Highness, don't mind me, Feng Xin shouted, then turned to Muqing to continue. Why are you always so irritated? Tell us, just what exactly irritates you? I've tolerated you for a long time now, but I'm not going to hold back today. I can't fucking stand your type. You're nothing but a deputy general, and without His Highness's appointment, who knows where you'd be? So why do you always act like you're smarter, sharper, and stronger than him? If you're so competent, then why did His Highness ascend and not you? Muqing cried. Shilian pulled at him. Drop it, Feng Xin. Muqing is just anxious over the current situation. Anxious my ass, Feng Xin cut in. Your Highness, I'm telling you, all he wants is to find reasons to lecture you. He won't let go of any chance he gets to show he's better than you, because he genuinely, seriously believes he's better than you. With an apathetic person like him, you don't usually see any sign that he actually cares about the kingdom of Shenle. But now, suddenly, he's anxious? He turns to Muqing again. You really think I can't tell that you think His Highness is a fool? I can tolerate your sarcasm and those rolling eyes. I can tolerate you always standing where you shouldn't be in the upper court. You like to show off, and it's hardly the first time you've pulled this shit. So fine, go show off. You're not good enough to wow the heavens anyway. His Highness doesn't mind, so I don't give a shit either. But since you're gonna cross the line, I'm not gonna hold back. Listen up. I'm not surprised you'd leap at the chance to use despicable means, but His Highness is His Highness. No matter what he decides, you better respect it. Don't you dare be so critical, and don't forget who the fuck you are. As Feng Xin tore into Muqing, Shilian tried to stop him multiple times. But because he's been holding back for so long, he couldn't be stopped from spilling everything in one go.
My God.
Muqing's face paled by a shade with every word. At first, he jerked as if he wanted to fight, but by the end, he stood, unspeaking, glaring ominously at Feng Xin. Shilian was furious. Are you done? Do you want me to kick both you out? Function's face was completely beet red with all the blood that had rushed to his head, and he stiffened his neck. Kick me out for all I care. I don't give a shit about being a heavenly official. If it wasn't for your highness's appointment, I really wouldn't give a damn, he declared. But even if you boot me back to the mortal realm and I become human again, I will still be loyal to you, your highness. At your command, I will be the first to charge forward, and I won't stand for a traitor. If this guy can't use you as a stepping stone to become a heavenly official himself, he might not even bother following you anymore. I bet he doesn't even have a single good thing to say about you. There, I'm done. At first, Mu Ching was silent, his lips pursed tightly, but he'd held back for too long as well. He couldn't put up with it anymore and yelled back, "Fucking use him? What a beautiful speech, but what do you know?" Shilian was going mad. "Both of you, shut up, shut up!" The two bit back their retorts with immense difficulty. The dispute this time was too great, and even training idioms couldn't save them. It was a while before Shilian could push down his fury. "In any case, cursing is a no-go," Shilian stated, his head throbbing. Mu Ching scoffed, but he still acknowledged. "Sure, you're the boss." Fengqing was more succinct. "Yes, sir." Mu Ching returned to his normal, impassive self and said, "If there were any consequences, His Highness would take on the burden himself anyway." Fengqing clicked his tongue but didn't say another word. Shilian acquiesced immediately. "Of course, I've already decided." Just then, the three of them all felt violent tremors, their bodies swaying with the quakes. Shilian was bewildered. "What's going on?" Fengqing was the first to react. "Earthquake!" Let me drink.
Bro, what? What's that?
That was them getting real and having their first big fight.
Dude.
They're so silly, I love them. But Function's so loyal. It's my boy. With earthquakes come casualties, and Shilian shouted, "Save the people!" Just as they were about to rush out, someone quickly rolled from under the bed and extended their arms. Cousin, don't forget about me. Take me along too." Seeing him, Shilian was even more perplexed. "Qi-Rong, why are you in my bedchambers?" He couldn't possibly fathom the bizarre life Qi-Rong lived, having nothing better to do all day than collect anything related to Shilian. He also didn't know how long Qi-Rong had been listening in on them in secret. But with such a dire situation at hand, he didn't have time to question him. He grabbed Qi-Rong's arm and ran, disposing of him in an open area. There was chaos within the palace, and countless attendants screamed as they rushed out of that extravagant building. "Is anyone hurt? Is there anyone trapped?" Shilian called out loudly. Fortunately, it wasn't long before the earthquake stopped, and after inquiring around, it seemed that there were no wounded or dead. Nevertheless, he was tense. Suddenly, there was another scream, and many were pointing at the sky behind him. Shilian whipped around, and his pupils shrank. At the center of the palace, there was a gigantic, magnificent pagoda, and it was now tilting to the side at a dangerous angle. The Celestial Pagoda was going to collapse. This Celestial Pagoda, known officially as the Pagoda of Celestial Being, had centuries of history in its walls, and was one of the signature features of the Shenle Palace. It was also the tallest building in all of the imperial capital, sitting at its heart between the palace and the city. It was a renowned landmark. If this pagoda fell, there would be innumerable casualties. The palace attendants and the pedestrians on the streets outside all started fleeing with even more panic. Seeing this, Shilian's right hand swiftly moved to cast a spell, and he yelled in the direction of Mount Taisang, "Come! Come, Guardian!" The pagoda continued to lean slowly, and just as it bent 1/3 of the way down, the masses suddenly felt another round of tremors. This tremor also came from the ground, yet it was different from that of an earthquake. The tremors came one at a time in their own rhythm, and they came faster and faster, closer and closer. As the pagoda continued to tilt, the people finally realized that those tremors were the footsteps of something. A giant golden statue, its glowing body over 15 meters tall, a sword in one hand, a flower in the other, its body streaked with rays of light, was striding towards the palace. "Isn't that the Crown Prince statue from the Royal Holy Temple's Palace of Shenle?" someone shouted in amazement. Soon, many more recognized it. "It's true! It's the golden statue! Look, it's coming from Mount Taisang!" Every step that golden statue took spanned kilometers, but it didn't step on a single person. Thump, 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 it strode into the palace as if in flight and caught the collapsing celestial pagoda. That glowing gilded figure, shining with golden light under the setting sun, raised both hands and exerted all its strength to hold up the gigantic pagoda that had almost fallen. It was the very image of a miracle, shocking countless witnesses into awed silence. Meanwhile, Chilian slowly withdrew his hand and looked up at his divine statue. Gazing at that calm, handsome, gilded face, confusion flickered through his mind. This was the very first divine statue the people had built for him, and it was also the most magnificent, and stately. In the past, seeing that version of himself, Chilian had simply accepted it, not seeing any problem. Yet at that very moment he saw that golden, scintillating giant figure as endlessly foreign and couldn't help but think, is that really me? Feng Xin and Mu Qing went about separately to check for trapped victims who hadn't yet been found. That flicker of confusion passed quickly, and seeing the crowd settling, Chilian breathed a sigh of relief. But before that breath was completely exhaled, his heart lurched when he suddenly felt a heavy weight on his body. That celestial pagoda was too tall and too heavy after all. The divine statue also seemed to find its burden strenuous. Its hands trembled, its feet sank into the ground, and its gigantic golden body was slightly bent from the pressure. Only that smile remained unchanging. Seeing this, Chilian immediately cast another spell. However, when the spell was cast, his heart dropped. Not only did the golden statue not straighten up, it was pushed down even further and looked like it might not be able to hold on much longer. Chilian's hands, too, started trembling. He had never felt like this before. Whatever mountain he punched, that mountain must fall, and should he stomp, the earth would quake. This was all he had ever known about himself, and at that moment he had never so fully understood the concept of strength falling short of desire. With no other choice, Chilian clenched his teeth and leapt into the air. He landed and seated himself on the foot of that gigantic golden statue, before raising his hands to cast spells once more with renewed force. This time he joined the fray himself, and sure enough, that golden statue rose again, its head shot up, and it raised the leaning celestial pagoda up once more. Although he managed to bear its weight, both Chilian's back and his mind were rolling with cold sweat. However, the countless people outside the palace were ignorant of his unspeakable hardship, and were already approaching in waves to prostrate at the miraculous golden statue, hollering as they did. In the kingdom's time of need, His Highness the Crown Prince has shown us his divine spirit before us. Your Highness, you must save us. Protect the people. Protect the world. Chilian was gritting his teeth, and it was a while before he managed to say, Everyone, please stand up and back away. Go further. Do not stand around here. He trailed off, suddenly realizing he was actually running out of breath. His voice was drowned out by the tidal of cheers, and the more he tried to amplify it, the smaller he found himself to be. Chilian drew a deep breath and was about to shout again when a hand suddenly grabbed his ankle. He looked down, and it was Qirong. Qirong, hurry and tell everyone not to crowd around here, he quickly said. The pagoda might collapse. Those words were unintentionally blurted, and when Chilian realized what he had said, his blood ran cold. In the past, it wasn't that he would never have said those words, the mere thought of them would never entered his mind. Even if the sky was going to fall, he would have believed he could support it. But now, he realized something alarming. He no longer believed that. Not only had the people stopped believing in him, he could no longer believe in himself. How can it collapse? Aren't you holding it up? Qirong responded instantly without thought. Hearing him, Chilian felt his heart quiver again. Qirong didn't notice his ashen expression, and his eyes were bright with a hungry look. Cousin, let me help you. Chilian was taken aback. Help me? How? Didn't you say you knew how to inflict human face disease? Qirong immediately replied. Tell me how to do it, and I'll help you curse Yang'an. I'll help you kill them. So he did hear everything they discussed while he was hiding under the bed. Chilian was weak from sheer anger. You fool! Don't you know what a curse is? However, Qirong was nonchalant. I do. Isn't it just a curse? Cousin, let me tell you, I have quite the talent in this area. I curse my dad often, and I suspect he may have died from my curses. Chilian couldn't listen anymore and said, Just go. No, Qirong exclaimed. Fine, don't tell me how to cast the curse. Just tell me. How can I avoid getting human face disease? Shilian's heart continued to drop, and Chirong pressed him. You know how, right? You know why the soldiers weren't getting infected, don't you? Cousin, tell me why, please. There were still many palace attendants gathered nearby, and who knew just how many ears were listening. Shilian was afraid that leaking information might start something terrible, so he remained silent. But sure enough, some people couldn't keep quiet any longer, and began to bombard him with questions. Your Highness, is that true? You really know how to cure human face disease? Why didn't you say something? There was a ravenous glint in the people's eyes, in Chirong's eyes. Shilian kept his mouth shut tightly, managing only to grit a response through his teeth. No, I don't know anything. That caused a small disturbance in the crowd, but it didn't escalate. Just then Feng Xin returned. He saw from afar that Chirong was lurking near Shilian and barked at him. What are you doing? Feng Xin, come take him away, Shilian immediately ordered. Feng Xin acknowledged the command and came forward, but Chirong latched on to Shilian as he cried fervently. Cousin, you're going to defeat Yong'an and chase them all away for sure, right? You'll protect us for sure, right? Right? A few months ago, maybe Shilian would still have emphatically answered with fervor, I will protect you all. But he didn't dare do so any longer. Chirong's expression was wild with excitement, and Shilian was a little puzzled watching him. He knew very well that Chirong was not the type to be concerned with the kingdom, nor its people. Even if the kingdom was doomed, he should be more scared than anything. So why the excitement? Moments later, he suddenly remembered. Wasn't Chirong's father from Yong'an? Hearing no response, Chirong's voice suddenly turned sharp. Cousin, you won't really let this happen, right? Are you just going to let us be trampled and ridiculed like this? Do we really have no other way? Under this interrogation, Shilian could feel his heart breaking, because he realized Chirong wasn't wrong. In the face of everything, he really, really didn't know what to do. Let me go and request the king detain him again, Feng Xin said. Whisker. Even while being dragged away, Chirong was still struggling, and he roared, You have to hold on! You can't fall! He couldn't fall. Shilian himself knew that he couldn't afford to fall. Even if the nearby civilians evacuated, the Celestial Pagoda must not be allowed to fall. If it collapsed, not only would the centuries-old royal monument be destroyed, the main part of the Grand Avenue of Divine Might, with its many residents, would be demolished. Moreover, within the pagoda, there were countless rare treasures, centuries-old scrolls passed down from countless ancestors of generations past. They couldn't be retrieved in time, and if the pagoda collapsed, they would all be gone. And if it collapsed, it would bring down with it the royal eminence of the kingdom of Shenle. However, his spiritual power, like Yong'an's water, seemed to be drained by the day. In order to support that gigantic golden statue, he couldn't leave his position for even a moment. He had to pass on the duty of guarding the city to Feng Xin and Mu Qing, while he staunchly remained where he was, meditating in forced calm. And since that dozen-meter-tall golden statue was the divine statue worshipped on Mount Taisong, within the royal holy temple, after Shilian summoned it over, the devotees there had no idol to worship, and they came in swarms to pray to it under the open skies. Although this was the palace, and the outsiders shouldn't have been allowed to enter, the earthquake had collapsed a section of the palace walls. The capital was in chaos, and there wasn't enough authority to go around. Even if there was, any more oppressive acts of authority might incite another riot, so the people had to be let through. Shilian stayed seated there, and the king and queen would visit him every day. Days passed in a blur as he spent all of his power holding that celestial pagoda up, while trying to restore his energy at the same time, waiting for a time to come when he could be relieved. The king didn't have it any easier. His hair was now mostly white, and even though he was in his prime, he had the appearance of a man over 50. When father and son saw each other, though they didn't speak, they were now more at peace with each other than ever before. The queen had watched Shilian grow up, but she had only ever seen her beloved son in a state of elegance and divinity. Now it was with sorrow and grief that she watched him bitterly guard the palace, exposed to the harsh elements, and refusing to let anyone close to help cover him. She stood under the scorching sun herself to shield him from the rays with an umbrella. After a while, fearing that she was exhausted, Chilean spoke up. Mother, go back. I don't need this. Don't come near, and don't let anyone else come close. I'm scared that... But in the end, exactly what he feared never left his lips. The queen's back was facing the devotees gathered there, and having kept her composure for so long, tears at last streamed down her face. My child, you've suffered so terribly. Why? Why would such punishment befall you? The queen painted her face heavily to hide its pale, sallow complexion, but with her tears the foundation melted and revealed a woman who was no longer youthful. She grieved for her son, wept for her son, but she didn't dare weep out loud, for fear that the people would notice her upset. The king held her shoulders, and Chilean watched her in dazed confusion. When they suffer, the first thing people think of is their loved ones, and to Chilean that meant his mother. It would be pointless, perhaps, to state it out loud, but after days of exhausting strain, after having been cut down again and again by countless knives, right then he really wanted to be 10 years old again and run into his mother's embrace to cry to his heart's content. And yet every road he walked had led to this day. That led to this day was chosen by Chilean himself. His parents were already in a difficult situation, and with so many citizens watching him intently, he could never show a trace of weakness. If even he couldn't hold on, who could? Thus, Chilean spoke against his heart. Don't worry, mother. I'm all right. I'm not suffering. Whether he was suffering or not, only he knew deep down. A few palace attendants came to help the king and queen away, and as they left, they looked back with every step. Once they were gone, Chilean was again exposed under the scorching sun, and lethargy overtook him. Some time passed, and when he opened his eyes again, dusk was settling on the horizon. The setting sun had shone its last rays, and only a few scattered devotees were left below him. When he looked down, he noticed that not far from where he sat there was a small, lonesome flower. Chilean wasn't very sure when exactly that flower had been placed there, and he reached to pick it up. It was a tiny flower, snow-white, with a lush green stem, its stalk thin and weak, bearing tear-like dew, pitiful-looking. The faint fragrance was almost familiar, and though ordinary, it gladdened his spirit. He clutched the flower tight, despite himself, and pressed it near his heart. Just then, the sudden stench of blood overtook that faint fragrance. Chilean looked up, and his sight was muddled by a screaming shadow that hurtled towards him. Why? Why? Startled, Chilean repelled his attacker with a wave of his sleeve and tried to summon some strength. Who? The shove sent the person tumbling and rolling over the ground. Chilean still had to support the giant golden statue and didn't dare rise, didn't dare go close. But it only took a second for him to recognize who it was. That individual only had one leg. It was the young man who once gave him an umbrella, the one whose leg he'd personally amputated. That young man was covered in blood, with equally stained palms. He'd come crawling using both hands, and his one remaining foot, and there was a horrifying trail of blood behind him. He sat up with difficulty, and Chilean asked, dumbfounded, Why are you here? Weren't you recuperating in Buyu Forest? The young man only crawled closer, not answering him. Since he only had one leg, it was a horrifying sight. You! Chilean exclaimed. In a fit, the young man yanked up the trouser hem of his remaining right leg and demanded, Why? On his right leg, there was a contorted human face. This was one of the things Chilean had worried about the most, and sure enough, it had come to pass. If he wasn't already seated, he might have fallen over. The young man slapped on the ground and roared, Why did you cut my leg off? It still came back. My leg is gone. Why? Give me back my leg. Give me back my leg. That rainy day, this young man's face had been full of smiles when he stuffed that umbrella into Chilean's hands. Yet before him now, he was in a state of madness. The difference was striking. Chilean's mind was in chaos and a complete mess, and his voice trembled. It took him moments before he snapped out of it and said, Let me help you. He quickly cast a spell to suppress the evil poison circulating in that young man's leg. Yet unexpectedly, the sound of wailing came from all around, and several more people lunged at him, crying, "Your Highness, save me! Your Highness, save me! Your Highness, look at my face. I've cut off half of my face, so why is it still not healed? Why? Just what? What do we have to do to cure this? Your Highness, look at me. Look at what I've become." Scene after gory scene was endlessly thrust before him. Shulian's expression was blank with shock. Not knowing what to do with his hands, he waved them as he mumbled, "No, I don't want to look. I don't want to look." As it turned out, once the human face disease patients from Buyu Forest relapsed, a full riot erupted at last. Shockingly, they managed to fight through the soldiers and doctors guarding and nursing them, and escaped the camp in search of him. Since they had all escaped, if he didn't immediately suppress their infections, the disease might spread faster to the wider population. Shulian closed his eyes and tried to work his powers, wanting to help alleviate their symptoms, and relieve their pain for the time being. However, as soon as that group was taken care of, more swarmed over to surround him. "Your Highness, help me! Help me too!" Surrounded by dozens, Shulian vaguely felt the golden statue above him swaying, and apprehension filled him. Wait, Someone couldn't wait and cried, "No! I don't want to wait! I've already waited too long!" "Your Highness, why would you treat him but not me?" Soon the voices around him changed. "How come when you treated him, he was good as new, but I'm not any better? Aren't you a god? Why are you so unfair? I demand justice."
Oh boy.
Shulian argued back. "No, I'm not being unfair. This isn't on me. Your symptoms are different. If you're going to help, help all the way. Now you want to drop everything? What exactly are you playing at? Is it up to you to decide?" Shulian was having trouble catching his breath. "I'm not dropping anything. Wait. Don't you know how to cure this disease?" Shulian opened his mouth. "If you know, why won't you tell us?" Shulian clutched his own head. "I don't know anything." "You're lying. I already heard someone talking, you know. I've seen through you. You won't tell us because you just want us to keep begging like this so you can steal our donation money. Liar. You're a liar. That's the cure. What's the cure? Just tell us. Tell us now." Shulian's face was white as a sheet, his eyes vacant. Countless hands shoved him, and there was even a pair maliciously strangling him. Then, the most ridiculous thing happened. He was clearly a god of heaven, but in that moment, a feeble voice cried out at the bottom of his heart, "Save me." It seemed like someone was pulling those hands away, but at the same time not. He couldn't be sure. The only things he could see were those bloody, scarred faces, those people with missing limbs, who looked like they were going to tear him apart and devour him piece by piece. He didn't know how long it had been when in the far distance he heard the demonic howling of a horn. The crowd only cared for their own screaming and tearing and ignored that horn completely, but Shulian snapped out of it instantly. That was the sound of Yong'an's victory horn. He couldn't sit still any longer, or perhaps the burden had finally crushed him. His body bent, and he keeled over. At the same time, the giant gilded figure he had so arduously supported mimicked his movement, and like its life was suddenly snuffed out, it collapsed with a boom. Along with it came another loud rumble. That gigantic, heavy, celestial pagoda came crashing down, crumbling like the golden statue. The gilded figure shouldn't have been so breakable, but because Shulian had injected too much spiritual power into it, hoping that it'd hold up the celestial pagoda, it had long since grown fragile. The patients who had escaped Buyu Forest were fleeing, dying, getting hurt. The crowd scurried wildly through the palace and the streets, some dodging fragments of the celestial pagoda, some dodging those horrifying disease victims. With both hands clutching his own head, Shulian ran and stumbled as he headed for the grand gates of the imperial city. The city towers were ablaze, rolling with thick, black smoke. Shulian rushed up to the terrace, passing numerous distraught, fleeing soldiers, but when he arrived at the platform, he didn't know what to do. He stared down below at a complete loss, his face ashen and streaked with tears that had started to flow without him realizing. In his blurry field of vision, corpses scattered the fields. Only the silhouette of a white cloth figure was distinct, his expansive sleeves fluttering. That figure wasn't a youth, but a man, and when he turned his head, he spotted Shulian from afar. He waved at him in a carefree manner, looking like he was about to vanish into the air. Seeing this, Shilian cried sharply, "Don't go!" The first 2 times Shilian had encountered him, he'd used a fake skin. This time, Shilian's instincts told him that this must be his true form. Thus, he hopped over the city wall without hesitation and leapt from the tall battlement. Shilian had jumped from extreme heights countless times, relying on his strong spiritual power and martial might. He landed safely every time, and it always filled him with pleasure and pride. Every time, he was the very picture of the celestial descents they spoke of in legends. This time, however, he was no longer a legend. When he landed, he wasn't steady, and his foot twisted. The needle-sharp pain instantly shot up his leg and through his entire body. He had broken his leg. Breaking a leg wasn't really a big deal, and it soon healed. But since that day, it were as though Shilian had become an entirely different person. It was like he had lost his spirit and divine invincibility. After the first defeat, there would be a second, and then a third. He didn't want to draw his sword, nor join the battlefield anymore. But because there was no one who could shield or replace him, he could only boldly sally forth. On the battlefield, he didn't slack off. He genuinely did his utmost. But for some reason, even though he was clearly a young man barely past 20, the hand holding the sword shook like that of an ailing elder. He shuddered with a heart full of fear, yet he couldn't explain who or what exactly he was afraid of. Finally, the soldiers who used to revere him began to lose patience. Shilian knew that a rumor had started circulating among them. How is he a martial god? More like a god of misfortune. He couldn't rebut it, because he had also started wondering the same thing. Had he really, maybe, turned into a god of misfortune? It would have been wonderful if that was the only issue, but the real catastrophe, the thing that sealed the kingdom of Shenlo's doom, was that human face disease was now completely out of control. 500, 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, towards the end. Shilian could no longer dare to ask just how many people had been infected today. And at the end of it all, like a sentence handed down to a criminal, the heavenly realm at last reopened its gates to him, and sent forth a message. Your Highness, it is time to return to the upper court. It was clear what would be waiting for him when he returned to the heavens. Feng Xin and Mu Qing both looked a little uneasy for once, while Shilian, on the other hand, was concerned with something else. Before we leave, I want to go somewhere to have a look, he said to them. Where? Feng Xin asked. The Royal Holy Temple, Shilian replied. After a moment of silence, Feng Xin said, Don't. Shilian had already walked off on his own. Your Highness, Feng Xin cried. But seeing that he couldn't be stopped, he and Mu Qing could only run after him. The 3 of them hiked up the mountain on foot. The Royal Holy Temple was where Shilian's first holy temple had been erected, and it was also where his first divine statue was built. However, by the order of the state preceptor, those 3,000 disciples had long since been disbanded and sent down the mountain, and the Royal Holy Temple stood empty. When they were halfway up the mountain, Shilian looked down. He could see clusters of fires ablaze everywhere in the capital, the brilliant flames reflecting a sky full of twinkling stars, a beautiful sight to behold. Feng Xin, however, yelled angrily, Those madmen! Shilian's eyes were transfixed by the flames, and Feng Xin tried again. Stop looking! There's nothing good to see! In recent days, Feng Xin had yelled at Shilian countless times. Do you enjoy finding grief for yourself, or what? But truthfully, Shilian didn't know what he wanted to do. He only knew that whenever one of his temples was burned down or desecrated, he was uncontrollably drawn to see it for himself. Yet once he'd seen, he couldn't speak nor stop anyone. He could only stand there and watch helplessly. What was there to see? He didn't know either. Firelight was also blazing on the Crown Prince summit. Feng Xin was aghast. They couldn't even let the Royal Holy Temple go? Did someone desecrate their ancestors' graves or something? He trailed off and shut up, since he realized the suffering of those from Shenlo was far worse than any sarcastic comments about desecrating ancestors' graves. However, the fire wasn't severe, and it soon died down, seemingly extinguished by someone. Now Feng Xin was really surprised. These days, there were only people who dared to set fire, not extinguish the flames. If anyone tried to step in, to talk down or stop those angry mobs from setting fires and destroying temples, they would be treated like the very god of misfortune, Shilian himself, and get beaten to death. Because of this, the three of them no longer dared to reveal themselves before mortals, and had long since hidden away their forms. All along the path up the mountain, the three could hear the commotion of a brawl. Once they reached the Crown Prince summit, sure enough, the palace of Shenle had already been mostly torn down, leaving only the frame and walls of the great hall. That huge divine altar no longer held a divine statue, and there was a gang of riffraff brawling in front of that decrepit entrance hall, jeering as they fought. "You damn mutt, shitty brat, did your wife lose her fucking virginity here or what? Is this broken shrine your precious family jewels or something?" With one look, Shilian knew that this group didn't come to destroy his temple out of anger. They were just a gang of punks who reveled in disorder, and they were either taking advantage of the situation or burning the temple down purely for fun. However, at this point, he didn't really care who was tearing his temples down anymore. Just then, in that crazed brawl, the exceedingly vicious voice of a boy pierced through and echoed in the night sky. "Beat it!" Listening closely, this was actually one person fighting the rest. Moreover, that one person was only a young teenager, still very much a child, but relentless all the same, and he didn't seem to be losing ground. Nevertheless, it was still one against many. The boy's face was already covered in blood and grime, battered blue and purple with cuts all over, to the point that his actual appearance was no longer recognizable. "That brat will definitely grow up to be a good man," Feng Xin commented. Just then, a malicious glint flashed in one of the men's eyes. He lifted a giant rock from the ground, ready to bash it into the back of the boy's head. Shilian saw and waved his hand once. The rock in that man's hand instantly rebounded, smashing into his own face, and he screamed as blood splattered out of his nose. The boy was stunned at the sight, but he immediately whirled around and raised his fist for another bout of berserk beating. The way he fought was too frightening, and it scared away the gang of grown men. They pointed at him as they fled, shouting empty threats. "Fuck you! Just you wait. We've got more guys, and we'll get you yet." The boy sneered. "You dare come back here and I'll fucking kill you." That terrified the men, and they ran off faster. With the fist fight over, the boy rushed over to a small mound and vigorously stomped on a fire that had already been extinguished, killing the last few sparks. After doing so, he entered the great hall. He picked up a piece of paper from the ground, carefully flattened it, and hung it above the altar. Finally, he sat down and leaned against the altar, lost in a daze. Shilian walked over and leapt airily onto the altar. He discovered that the paper the boy had hung there was a painting. The brushwork was immature, obviously done by someone who had never learned how to paint. Yet every stroke was serious and sincere, depicting the solemn figure of the god-pleasing crown prince. It seemed that this was used to replace the divine statue Shilian had summoned away. "Very well painted," Feng Xin remarked. After all these trying days, Feng Xin had finally found someone who would still defend Shilian. He was already so excited that he'd already joined the fight. He was already so excited that he'd almost joined the fight earlier to help the boy out, so naturally he felt that anything the boy did was great. Wu Qing, however, was unspeaking as he lowered his eyes flickering as if he was recalling something. Shilian raised his hand and lightly flicked the painting. It wasn't particularly obvious, and could have easily been mistaken for a breeze blowing past. And yet the boy's head shot up from where it lay on his hugged knees, and that heavily injured face brightened instantly at the sight. "Is that you?" Feng Xin was shocked. "What a sharp little brat." "Let's go," Wu Qing said. Shilian nodded lightly, and he was about to turn around to leave when the boy pounced on the edge of the altar, his breath coming quick. "I know it's you. Your Highness, don't go. I have something to say to you." Hearing him, the three of them were taken aback. That boy seemed quite nervous, with his fists clenched. He continued with what he meant to say. "Even though your palaces and temples are burned down, don't be sad. I will build you many more temples in the future, bigger, more magnificent, better than anyone else's. No one will be able to compete with you. I'll do it." The three were silent. That boy was dirty-faced and shabbily dressed, covered in bruises and cuts, looking extremely sad and pathetic. Yet he spoke with such ambitious, bold words. It sounded truly laughable, which brought up complicated feelings. Seeming afraid that his voice might not reach Chilian's ears, he cupped his hands around his mouth and shouted towards the painting hung above the altar. "Your Highness, do you hear me? In my heart you are God. You are the only God, the one true God. Do you hear me?" He screamed with all he had, to the point where all of Mount Taisong echoed with his voice. "Do you hear me?" Shilian suddenly burst out laughing. This laugh came too abruptly, surprising both Feng Xin and Mu Ching. Shilian shook his head as he laughed. That boy obviously couldn't hear him, yet he seemed to have sensed something. His eyes were bright as he looked around. Suddenly, without warning, a drop of ice-cold water landed on his cheek. The boy's eyes bulged, and in that instant his eyes reflected a snow-white figure. He blinked, and when he opened his eyes again, that reflection was gone. Seeing that Shilian had actually shown himself for a second, Feng Xin spoke up. "Your Highness, just now, did you—" Shilian looked confused. "Just now? Oh, my power's failing. I slipped up for a moment, that's all." The boy straightened up and rubbed hard at his eyes, as if trying desperately to retain that ephemeral shadow. Shilian, however, closed his own. Moments later, he spoke. "Forget it." He'd finally received a response, yet those were the words. That boy's eyes first lit up, his lips curling into a smile. But soon his expression turned to shock. The curve of his lips fell. "What? Forget what?" Shilian breathed a sigh and said to him in a soft voice, "Forget me." The boy was stunned and silent. "Forget me. Soon, no one will remember anyway," Shilian mumbled to himself. Hearing this, the boy's eyes widened. Silently, a single line of tears rolled down and washed a trail of pale white on his grimy face. He swallowed hard and gasped. Feng Xin seemed unable to bear the sight any longer and spoke up. "Your Highness, don't say any more. You're breaking the rules again." "Yes, I'm done. I've already broken so many rules. Just a few more words won't hurt," Shilian said. He didn't let the boy hear that last part. The three descended from the altar and walked towards the entrance of the broken great hall. The night breeze cut through him, and Shilian shook his head. He was still a heavenly official for now, and technically he couldn't feel cold. Yet at that moment he somehow felt a bone-deep chill. However, the boy they left behind in the great hall suddenly muttered, "I won't." He clearly couldn't see Shilian and his companions, but he somehow accurately grasped the right direction and charged out of the temple towards them, shouting at the retreating backs, "I won't!" The three of them looked back and saw the boy's eyes shining so bright in the black night that they pierced the soul. That battered face was both furious and sorrowful, both joyous and wild. In the midst of pouring tears, he cried, "I won't forget. I will never forget you." And that's the end of the flashback.
Wow.
At the end of season 2, they did his line, "I'll never forget you." We'll stop there for now.